Hello, my name is Greg Willoughby. I'm the Technical Service Manager for Helena Agri-Enterprises servicing the Northern Business Unit. I'm here to talk to you about soil fertility in regards to soybean production and setting the stage. Soil fertility is very important in soybean production. Not only do we normally talk about it from a soil test standpoint, but some new information that has come out makes how we manage that fertility even more important. On the screen, you should see a map showing how pH affects the availability of nutrients. pH is the controlling factor for most nutrient availability. That is the reason liming or trying to acidify soils to be in somewhere between around the 6.5 pH is ideal because it maximizes the amount of nutrients that can be available. This prevents interactions with other elements that can complex or take those elements away from the roots or outcompete those elements for the roots. In the case of competition, on the right-hand side, you see what's called Mulders Globe. Mulders Globe represents the interaction between elements that happens inside a plant. On the outside of the circle are the elements a plant generally needs. The lines on the inside show how they interact. When those elements on the outside get out of balance, or we have too high or too low soil test values, they can interact and actually impede the uptake of elements where those lines connect. This is the reason maintaining a balanced fertility program is very important in production of all crops. Part of this relies to the relationship between the concentration in the soil, concentration in the plant, and the yield that the plant produces. We typically have a response curve. As soil test values are deficient, we see an increase in yield as we bring those soil test levels up. That eventually plateaus, and that is where we have our critical level for our soil test values. And that varies by state and by soils. The key here, though, is that when we have nutrients interact, or we have nutrients that are tied up, or we have nutrients that are run out before the plant completes its life cycle, we can fall into a narrow range where we actually can lose yield production by upwards of 10% without actually seeing a visual symptomology of the yield being impacted. This is probably more evident in soybeans in some management practices than what we do in other crops. And that is simply because in a lot of areas, we still fertilize on a 2-year cycle. Fertilizing annually has been shown to increase soil test values faster, as well as with less fertilizer. That is because the fertilizer does not sit there for an entire year before the plant tries to access it. It decreases the amount of time for loss, decreases the amount of time for it being tied up. Because of that, we definitely recommend annual fertilization programs instead of fertilizing on a 2-year rotation. Most importantly, the most recent data that has come out is from the University of Illinois. In this trial, they actually looked at those two management practices, fertilizing in front of the soybean crop and fertilizing in front of the corn crop the previous year. In that situation, regardless whether they were looking at an early season variety or a full season variety, the early growth was the same. The number of nodes per plant, as well as the number of pods on those nodes. However, after about the 4th or 5th node of the plant, we started seeing a separation. At that point, the soybean crop that had fresh fertilizer in front of it, and by fresh I could mean fall applied or spring applied in front of that growing crop. And also I would add that starter on soybeans could also fit this scenario. At that point, we start seeing a separation. We start seeing more nodes and more pods on those nodes starting to form. And that continues almost all the way through the entire life cycle of the plant from that point forward. Obviously, more nodes, more pods equals more seed, which can translate into higher yield, providing there's enough nutrition and weather to get those beans large enough that they have a heavy enough weight to be harvested in the combine. From that factor, fertility late season can be very important, particularly if we turn dry or we have borderline test levels. And you'll hear more about that in the days to come. With that, thank you very much for your time. And please make sure your soybean crop is fertilized in front of the growing season in some fashion.